This session is entitled Dr. Yosef ben Jochannan and the Early History of Africa and the Nile Valley. I think it goes without saying that this is perhaps the second most central area of concern and investigation that Dr. ben Jochannan has been involved in throughout his life's work. Our first presenter will be Dr. Charsee McIntyre of SUNY State University in New York at Old Westbury. Charsee.
Hotel. The first thing I want to do is give Dr. Ben a memorial from the Du Bois. I didn't go to college till I was 36. I was the oldest Danforth, 40-something years old, and now I'm the one woman here in the afternoon. John Clark informed me and taught me how to study African history, and Dr. Ben taught me what to study. And so today I'm going to try to show you how I'm approaching it. In the beginning was not the word, but the sounds of the womb were heard. In the beginning was the sound of the heart pulsating life's rhythms. Those rhythms made known the other, the very real touch of another, the field touch of mother. In the beginning was the ear to hear the whispering sphere, giving life meaning, choice, and clear. Through cantations, pulsations, sensations, vibrations. In the beginning was being. I am womb, and without me be no man. That's fact. I am black, mother of all conception, seed of perception, giver of life, God's wife. I am womb and maker of Yunnan, bearer of soul, encompassing whole nations, all creations. I am pure soul, that's sure. Black hide and black pride and freedom stride is my goal. Yet I wait, while pain dulls my brain, looking for you to see me, black man, looking for you to understand black girl is black world. So I can't see here. Dr. Ben has suggested that in the beginning was the womb. What that means and how that informs my scholarship is what I wish to talk about today. The concept of the power of the womb must not be confused with reducing the creator, which never was created, to a deification of woman. That which created all things cannot be anthropomorphized, because then we enter in a concept of limitedness, that is, finality and morality. The principles of creation, which is all-encompassing, ever-generating, ever-continuous, and ever-changing, must be understood in its expansiveness. Thus, we discuss the beginning of what we can understand, humanity, and not the beginning of all that is and can be, which comes before the beginning in the Zamani, the total past, and obviously has no ending, only the ever-potential future. The womb in this perception becomes a place in which the dual principle of existence, male and female, conjoin. It is through the womb that is neither male nor female. The womb is a place of residence. But woman holds the ultimate power given to her by the Creator, which never was created. That power to decide who shall enter this earth plane of living and who shall not. Some scholars suggested Dr. Ben is a propagandist in his emphasis on the importance of women, the womb, and its dual principle. If so, then they must see European scholars such as E.A. Wallace Budge, translator of the Book of the Coming Forth by Day, mistakenly entitled the Book of the Dead, also as a propaganda. For he wrote that, quote, this is from the text, the Egyptian text, under the influence of Thoth, or that form of divine intelligence which created the world by a word, 8 elements, 4 female and 4 male, arose out of the primeval Nu, which possessed the properties of the male and the female. Budge gives the names of these 8 elements, which I shall not, and then writes they were considered as primeval fathers and mothers. Certainly for explaining humanity, the Egyptians saw the beginning as related to the womb. In a hymn to Osiris, we read, glory be to Osiris, the great God within Abydos, King of eternity, Lord of the everlasting, who passeth through millions of years in his existence, eldest son of the womb of Nut. Homage to thee, King of kings, Lord of lords, Prince of princes, who from the womb of Nut hast possessed the world and hast ruled all lands in acre. Dr. Ben's student, Dr. Dorothy Lee Cobb, in his book, The Mysteries, suggested that in seeking explanations for the how of existence, humans became cognizant of the generative powers of the moon as female and the sun as male. She explains the how by using the matrix, which Dr. Ben uses to explain the laws of opposites. The matrix itself is equivalent to the female, or mother, within which something originates or takes from. Man determined that it was the conjunction of the female and male principles that produced life. Thus, Mother Earth and the sky as father produced the land, animals, and even man himself. Or the moon and sun mating produced everything, or it was the combination of fire and water, who were the grandfather and the grandmother, all of which broken down were representations of the male and female. Mrs. Cobb further explicates the maleness in the symbolism of the Christian cross with its 3 parts, the horizontal and vertical. She defines the cross as representing the, quote, male organ of generation, including the phallus and testicle, while the ankh with the horizontal and vertical, just like the cross, plus the loop or egg, represent the female principle being shaped like the organ of the woman. Ms. Cross further, in relating numbers to symbolism, saw 4 as the most perfect number because it represents the conjunction of the male and female principle, attesting to the fact that creation can only occur with the union of male and female, such union representing perfection. From the union, Mrs. Cobb saw the child as humanity perfected, or the achievement of a form of immortality. She stated that, quote, man before he is born is a state of perfection, and he is in a state of perfection at death, and in between we're just in life. We need to understand that. That is what has happened. We find this dual male and female principle explanation in West Africa as well. I learned this from my eminent leader, Dr. Jeff. Discussing the ancient African symbol we have come to know as a swastika, the Algoran Bua describes this ancient African symbol as the coupling or union of 2 contrary, but we change it to complementarity, principles, the male and the female, according to whether it is left turning or right turning. Both symbolize man and woman, the woman-man and the man-woman. It's very interesting the way he puts this in this book, because he says the king, the queen, the king-queen, and the queen-king. It is a symbol of the twin God, God in 2 persons, the God of heaven masculine and the earth goddess feminine. To the archon, in each man there are female elements, the breast, and in each woman there are masculine elements, the clitoris. Niagara further states, it is necessary to know that for the Akan, the king concept involves two ideas, male and female, and two persons, king and queen. This does not refer to the queen as the wife of the king, but to a person of the female sex who is associated with the one of the male sex. This person is beside him in the great religious ceremonies, such that when this female person is not there, then the king is not there, even though he be there in person. Both of them are one person and one institution. Sheikh Anton Diop explained the idea Africans have that every person is born with female and male elements, which is why each must be initiated, circumcision for the men and clitoral incisions for the women. These rituals establish as testimony that that particular individual is making a commitment to the male or female principle, whichever signifies the apparent sex as each enters adulthood. We in the Western world would do not understand the need to make a commitment, much less commitments to a primeval principle. Dr. Ben has talked a lot about the power of the women. What's my time, Jan? Another form of showing the power of the women is the tale about Isis, dealing with Ra. In this tale, Isis is a woman. She's not a goddess. She seeks to be with the gods, so she creates a serpent who poisons Ra. Ra, in great pain, begins to die. Ra, the all-powerful, he reminds everyone of his greatness and calls forth the healing children of the god, but they cannot help him. Then Isis comes with all her healing powers and asks Ra, what is his trouble? And he tells her how wonderful and great he is. He caused everything. And she says, yes, you caused everything to be created, but that which you caused to be created is now destroying you. Tell me your name and I will heal you. And he again relates his greatness, but he still has a lot of pain. And she says again, if you tell me your name, I will heal you. Ra tells her his name. And says, Isis shall search into me, and my name shall pass from me into her. So you see, even though Ra is the most powerful of all, he still has human frailties, and he still recognizes the power of the female as a healing principle. She says, it is I who work. It is I who make to fall down upon the earth the vanquished poison. For the name of the great God hath been taken away from him. May Ra live, and may the poison die. May the poison die, and may Ra live. These are the words of Isis, the great goddess, the queen of the gods, who knew Ra by his own name. From this little tale, we see that Ra, the supreme god to many Egyptians, suffered weaknesses, as I said. There are other female deities, if you go through Dr. Ben's work. Nut, goddess of the sky, through whom all must pass to find Ra. And Maat, who represents truth, righteousness, and justice. In a hymn to Ra by, and I don't know how to say it, N-E-K-H-T, we find passages referring to these goddesses. O thou beautiful being, thou dost renew thyself in thy season in the form of the disk within thy mother Hathor. The goddess Nut doeth homage unto thee, and the goddess Maat embraceth thee at all times. Thou goest forth over heaven and earth, made strong each day by thy mother Nut. Ra liveth in Ma. Isis and Nephthys salute thee. They sing unto thee in thy boat hymns of joy. They shield thee with their hands. Thy mother Nut is a judge to thy father Nu. The other important tale about Isis I also learned from Dr. Ben's book, but also through Dr. J doing a lecture at my campus, has to do with the origins of the Egyptian phallic worship that we see in the obelisk. There are different versions, but the tale I like is the one in Dr. Ben's Mysteries. Osiris the man had been murdered by his brother Set Typhon. Osiris's body was later dismembered by Set. Isis, the wife's sister, found all the members of his body except the phallus, which had been eaten by the Nile catfish. Because Isis was unable to find the phallus of Osiris, she erected a giant pillar we call the obelisk, which was worshipped by the people. This tale is interesting because it debunks that whole mythology of penis envy. It was a woman who put the obelisk there. It should be mentioned that before Isis reconstituted Osiris's body, she gave birth to Horus. Okay? Thus, we can attribute the fish in the tale who ate the phallus as representing the female principle. And the condition for the birth of the son existed as the phallus was conjoined with the female. Horus was the fruit of the principle of generation, without whom it would have been impossible for the man Osiris to advance to another level of cognition, another level of development. Dr. Ben talks about the interpretation of the pyramid itself as a sexual symbol of the female principle, which would indicate not only the phallic nature of the belief systems held by the Africans, but the belief in a form of rebirth, as it could be seen that burial in the pyramid was analogous to the unborn child in the mother's womb. We make a major mistake if we look at the womb as analogous to the female genitalia. The womb is a residence which all humans known inhabit in their transition from wherever into this world, onto this plane, onto this level. Because of the reductionist quality of Eurocentric thought and language, the miracle of mother with child becomes denigrated to represent an accident which occurred because of lustful sexual intercourse rather than the spiritual event of moving the human species along its continuum of immortality. We also make a mistake when we discuss the power of women and think that we mean the lack of power of men. We mean both and rather than either or. Ra was most powerful, but Isis was capable of denuding him. It is difficult in this Western anti-female mother and child society to discuss the birth process as sacred and mystical in a manner similar to people who revere and appreciate the miracles of nature. For in fact, the Western world denigrates the female and all process seemingly solely hers as representative of Mother Nature and therefore inhering in some sinfulness. In the Old and New Testament, Satan the devil appears as a representation of evil and represents the demonic side of the divine wrath. And of course, in his temptational sphere in sexual activity, the role of the instrument of diabolical enticement devolves upon the woman. That's what you get. Eve is the etymology of evil. That's what Eve means. Many of us raised within the Eurocentric tradition find it difficult to understand Egyptian reverence for the woman, her female functions, and the recognition of the womb as the place of regeneration and immortality. We see God as an abstract being who relates to the physical realm, particularly the female's function, as if not downright sinful, at least representative of punishment for some original sinful act which plunged man into the abyss of this earth and away from the paradise in which he rightfully belonged. We need to think of God in some non-anthropomorphic manner, as I believe the ancient Africans did. Not as some pure white man diametrically opposed to and representational of the evil black woman. We need to think of God as being, creation in a non-gender signification. I refer to the Creator who never was as a spirit. And I get that from the Egyptian text. God is a spirit, a hidden spirit, the spirit of spirits, the great spirit of the Egyptians, the divine spirit. God is from the beginning and existed from the beginning, hath existed from old and was when nothing else had being. God is truth and liveth by truth and feedeth thereon. God is life, and through him only humans liveth. God is father and mother, the father of fathers and the mother of mothers, begetteth but was never begotten, produceth but was never produced, createth but never was created, is existent. The tradition of African people speaks to the communal, collective, and cooperative way, speaks to the laws of complementarity as opposed to the laws of opposition and individuality. Traditions are the reenactment of doing some things that have already been done. They are the recreations of those which are the best of our historical and cultural antecedents. They are the will of African people encompassing the vision to be as good as we were as we strive for our future generations to be better than we are. The African and therefore necessarily the African American tradition is one of togetherness. According to the African way, in the beginning of creation in the womb, woman and man, we were together. In the traditional social, family, and religious pattern, we were together. In the battles against the slave catchers, we were together. In the trek to the slave ships, we were together. In the slave castles locked in the cells, we were together. In the trek to the ancestral shores, we were together. In the ships changed to each other in life and sickness and dying, we were together. In the disembarking us at these new world seaports, we were together. In the slave auction blocks, we were together. In the seasoning process, we were together. In the enslavement as chattel, we were together. In the victimization through beatings, mutilization, rapes, and attempts at dehumanizing us by the slave owners, we were together. In the field, yard, or domestic involuntary labor, we were together. In the modes of resistance, silent and violent, we were together. In the continuous myriad of plots to become free, we were together. In the illusory moment of jubilee, we were together. In the temporary and tenuous black reconstruction, we were together. In the suffering under systematic oppression by the power structure of this racist nation, we were together. In the early petition and protest effort, and the later separatist and nationalistic effort, and emergence of today's revolutionary effort, we were together. In the demands for civil rights, decolonization, and nationhood, we were together. And in this thrust for total liberation and human rights on all levels of struggle throughout the African diaspora, we black men and black women must remain together. And through that togetherness, we must review critically what we have learned about our ancestral past. We must do that review through a critical Afrocentric lens, seeing the roles of our segments in our community in their complementarity and not through the distorted vision of Eurocentrism. Thank you.
Thank you, Charsee. Thank you very much for setting a model for the level of this panel in terms of both the quality and light of your presentation. I thank you also for staying nearly close to the 20-minute time limit. I will ask our next speaker to follow suit and perhaps reach the finish line a bit sooner. Brother Anderson Thompson from Chicago, professor at the Center for Inner City Studies, Northeastern Illinois University.
Brothers and sisters, Hotep. Well, I don't know. There's so much to be said here, but I know most of it has been said, so just add me to that list of all the great speech that you've heard here this afternoon and this morning and last night. I'm deeply honored to have been invited to be with you this evening, to bear witness, to give testimony, to glorify and celebrate the achievements, works, and immeasurable contributions of Dr. Ben Jochannan. I find it very difficult to even formally talk from the written page when I think about Dr. Ben because he means so much to me, but I'll try. I'm proud to be a part of this great ceremony which reaffirms our African value system, which constitutes our very existence over here in this wilderness. As a representative of the Kemetic Institute of Chicago, a member of the ASCAC board, and member and National Commissioner of Research for ASCAC, I would like to just say that we should at least set some kind of framework for, and of course this is what we've been doing all this time, but brothers and sisters, we're at war. And in all its forms, whichever way you would want to describe it, we are at war in this country. And I don't mind saying that I'm a Pan-Africanist, and I'm fighting for a future for my children, for the children of Africa, sons and daughters of Mother Africa, fighting for a United States of Africa that will manifest itself through an African economic world community. I see those as future goals for our people as we move towards the 21st century, which means that in a very short while, less than 12 years from now, we will usher in a new century, a new 100 years. But not only that, a new 1,000 years. And I'd like to ask this body, as we challenge the ASCAC members up in Aswan, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to just wait around and let someone plan the next millennium for us? Or are we going to take matters into our own hands? Well, I think we have an example here to give us the path, to give us the direction that we so sorely need. And therefore, I would like to say that in some small way, I'll try to make my little tribute as quickly as possible to Dr. Ben, our champion, the principal warrior and descendant from a long line of African historical freedom fighters, that small body of intellectual fighters and defenders and lonely soldiers, because that's the way it's been, who led us back to Mother Africa. First with the spoken word, then the written word, and finally through Dr. Ben, who took us by the shoulders and kicked our rear ends up to Aswan, to Nubia. And that is most important. Because Dr. Ben stands as the vital linkage between our intellectual ancestors, warriors and freedom fighters from the 20th, 19th, 18th century on backwards throughout the African world. He is the vital linkage to those timeless armies of African redemptionists, Ethiopianists, Pan-Africanists, Garveyites, African blood brotherhoodites, and black nationalists. He is that vital linkage to those unrecorded events and unrecognized warrior heroes and heroines who with great sacrifice struggled courageously to uphold the African way. He is that vital linkage to our true history and culture as an African people. He is that vital linkage to those fearless fighters who, as watchmen and timekeepers, remained ever alert and on guard against Western white supremacists who attempted to loot, steal, and falsify ancient history to that tiny unit of early African historical guerrilla fighters who took up the intellectual arms that we now benefit. I would like to just take out 5 pages and go to the next point. And that is, during the 50s and the 60s, 3 wise men from the East, Dr. Ben, Professor Clark, and Professor Jackson, came to Chicago. Not once, not twice, but many times during the years, bringing us spiritual and intellectual and historical nourishment for the thousands of black casualties and victims in the Midwest. We never tired of hearing Dr. Ben, Clark, and Jackson address hundreds of us, and as Dr. Crothers spoke to you, how they would stay with us, they would sleep with us, and would stay from time to time, spending evenings all the way into the midnight sessions after traveling with us through this long and tiring struggle. But let's get back to this tradition that Dr. Ben is a part of, because he's a part of those brothers and sisters who centuries ago, and I'll have to sort of repeat some of this, who were part of the great Pan-African stream. I'm sort of leaving off the integrationist stream as much as possible. And that was, of course, we've mentioned David Walker. I wanted to go through their works, but I'll just give the names. Hosea Easton, Reverend Henry Highland Garnett, Martin Robinson Delaney, James Theodore Holly, Edward Wilmot Blyden, who matched their one pamphlets in their travels of hundreds of miles by whatever means necessary to fight against hundreds of volumes of white scholarship in the coming, that came from the white social scientists. It is to those black men and women who battle against 1,000 lies, insults, and injuries aimed at us by both the black and white scholars against Mother Africa that we are here to celebrate Dr. Ben, because he represents the linkage to that great line. Alexander Crummell, as I said before, Henry McNeil Turner, J.E. Casely Hayford, Duse Muhammad Ali. To those who suffered humiliation and scorn from members of their own race, kin, and family, for their steadfast devotion to the cause of Africa, we are here to pay tribute to Dr. Ben. Henry Hubert Harrison, Charles Seifert, Drusilla Dungy Houston, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Amy Jakes Garvey, William H. Ferris, Dr. Willis N. Huggins, Dr. William Leo Hansberry, and Dr. W.B. Du Bois, Arthur Schomburg, John Edward Bruce, and Richard B. Moore. There's such a line of heroes and fighters. Lorenzo Dow Turner, Noble Jew Ali, J.A. Rogers, Carter G. Woodson. And of course, Carter G. Woodson said a very important point. The more you read The Miseducation of the Negro, the more you realize how miseducated you are. He said that the most successful black leaders were those who either had no education or recovered from the one they received from the Europeans. Okay? And so we pause for Dr. Woodson, but we must keep moving on. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and of course, Professor George G.M. James, and our eminent and most important stalwart in West Africa, Professor Cheikh Anta Diop, and Dr. Chancellor Williams, and last, Professor John Henry Clark and Professor John Jackson. That's just a list of those freedom fighters. And where am I at this point? Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the points that have been raised this evening, but I'll at least try to reemphasize them, because Dr. Ben challenged more than 30 million blacks in this country to love Africa. And, you know, that's very difficult, as Dr. Crothers had mentioned, to the red, white, and blueites versus the red, green, and blackites. It's been a real problem. So number one, Dr. Ben, the writer, self-publisher, distributor, wholesaler, and retailer of his own creative works to his people. Number two, Dr. Ben, the messenger, as Professor Clark would describe him, the timekeeper, who tells African people what time it was, what time it is, and what time it's supposed to be. Who traversed the USA, the Caribbean, South, Central America, the continent of Africa, and Europe with his Pan-African message to the sons and daughters of Mother Africa. Number three, Dr. Ben, the spiritual father of the Pan-African movement, always there. Number four, Dr. Ben, the activist, from the African grassroots to the grass-colored American grass tips, who was always there. Dr. Ben, the African philosopher, shaper of ideas, concepts, revealers of the African way, the African worldview, through his actions. Dr. Ben, the servant and teacher and leader who gave more than 4 decades of bringing the nourishment of Africa and Kemet to the starving black minds, and now he's giving us, leading us physically back to Mother Africa and Kemet. Number 7, Dr. Ben, his impact on the civil rights, the black power and African liberation movements, and the Kemetic Nubian movement that's now developing over here in this country. Dr. Ben and his impact on Kemet itself, the Egyptian government and the people. Dr. Ben, the fighter for Nubian human rights and liberation up in Aswan. And Dr. Ben, who took us on the mission to Kemet that we've never recovered from. And finally, Dr. Ben, the unwavering intellectual warrior and freedom fighter who takes up arms every day against the European machine. And we call him our African guerrilla freedom fighter, or what we should call Hitman Dr. Ben. Now, the implications and the possibilities of dealing with Nubia are staggering. It is in the order of the great goddess Maat, that is, we give thanks to Dr. Ben that when 1,000 of us journeyed to Aswan to hold the 4th annual meeting of ASCAC conference, that the 2 of Mother Africa's children, one torn away from Mother Africa's womb more than 400 years ago, the other, the black-skinned Nubians of Aswan, captives in their own home, who have been tangled and trampled upon and crushed underfoot for more than 1,500 years. That is one of the challenges of the 21st century that we seem to be moving on, and I welcome it. Now, what are some of the things that must be done? And of course, there's many things that we must do. We must develop the groundwork for an African-centered analysis, as you've heard so brilliantly from Professor Asante and Dr. Crothers. The analysis that will be developed, widened, and strengthened to encompass those specific things happening to us, to black people, here and now. a philosophy of history, or what we call historiography, and a methodology of studying and understanding Kemet, out of which will flow fiction and non-fictional works, textbooks for elementary schools, and general readings for the African public at large. Our increase in numbers demands further resurrection of the African way of knowing that will improve our level of understanding of both ourselves and the rest of the African world community. So, I'm not really closing. How many seconds do I have? Oh, 2 minutes, all right. Let's see here. Yeah, all right. What I really wanted to talk about was while we were struggling, and I'll say it in 2 minutes, during the March on Washington, Civil Rights Movement in 1963, Watson, New Jersey, and Detroit, the Black Power Movement in 1966 in D.C., 67 in Newark, 68 in Philadelphia, the AHSA beginnings in 68 in California, and then the explosive that took place in Montreal in 1969, giving us 1970 AHSA in Washington, D.C., to the Congress of African Peoples, 1970 to 1974, the Association for Study of Negro Life and History in New York in 1968, when in 69 there was an explosion at the Tutwiler Hotel when the blacks there decided they would caucus on those blacks who did not want to get up off of the word Negro in the title of the association, and the use of white historians at the association who grew rich at our expense. That was a challenge that created many of the organizations that we're now a part of. The National Black Political Assembly of Gary 1972, Little Rock 1974, Cincinnati 1976, African Liberation Day marches 1972 to 1974. Why is this important? Because our approach to history should not be a lineal, local, chauvinist approach. While this was happening, Dr. Ben was everywhere. All during this, he was there. If it had not been for him, we would not have had a perspective on how to deal with many of these situations, especially the great confrontation that took place from 72 to 74 between the so-called black Marxists and Pan-Africanists, or black nationalists, or whatever you want to call that group. We have a very rich history. The reason I gave off this is because we will have to sit down, all of us, and empty our minds, which Brother Larry and Charsee and Jake and the rest of us have discussed, so that we can put this in context for our young people, because we're missing a very sizable linkage in the history of our people, and we don't want to have another 40-year intellectual default of what has gone before us. So if we want to make the future a United States of Africa for the African world community, then we will have to look back at the past, but you must remember that all history is written with an eye towards the future. It's written in the present with an eye towards the future. It's never a look backwards. We're always looking at the past because we know what we want the future to be, and therefore Dr. Ben is an outstanding example of that future, because his future is now over in Kemet. He's starting his new, well, I don't know how many phases of boyhood he's had, but he's going into another one now, and his rebirth is our rebirth. And I'd like to thank you once again. Brothers and sisters, Hotep.
Thank you, Brother Andy, for maintaining the standard already set, and for doing what I asked, which was to stay very well within that frame. And he was good. I think his suggestions about the kinds of things we need to be considering in terms of the history of our time and what it means toward the future is critical. And hopefully, as a part of this gathering, a number of us will, and a number of you all will be able to get together and start to talk about future collaborations and associations. I was sitting there with some degree of marvel, Andy, to look at the way you had sort of rattled off those critical dates with such sharpness of memory. You know, I think about them, but at times I get very fuzzy on all those dates, and precisely as the precision, the way in which you've done it. And I think that's important, that your memory is still as sharp as it is, and we need to take advantage of that. Our next presenter is Brother Larry Williams, who is no stranger to you, to any of you here and in ASCAS, and I'd like him to come forward. Brother Larry Williams from Atlanta, Georgia.
I'd like to say Hotep to everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. When Professor Harris called me and asked me to participate in this symposium or colloquium, I I was somewhat overjoyed because many times you think about a person who's alive and doing research, you know, sometimes you never get a chance to tell them exactly how you feel and how to appreciate them. But Dr. Ben is special for me because I became aware of him in 1970 when he first published Black Man of the Nile. And Dr. Clark and Malcolm had woke me up earlier, but Dr. Ben kind of put that fire in my brain. And ever since then, I've been trying to follow him, buy everything that he publishes, find every article that's been written on him or by him, and part of that is part of the bibliography and study guide in the paper I'm about to present. I want to first dedicate this to, first, my mother, who's deceased, who always supported me in my blackness, to my wife, and my daughter and my son, who are at home in Atlanta, keeping the fort down.
Yes.
I'd like to start also by giving a quote by one of our presenters who will present tonight, Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, who's like a brother. The first time I met him, he's like Dr. Ben. You meet him, it's like you knew him all your life. Asa had written in a study guide of his a special quote, and I think this crystallizes what Dr. Ben means and what he teaches. Asa has written, "A people without a memory or with a false memory is a disabled people. They have nothing to process, or more likely, they have garbage to process. For too long, African Americans have been deprived of a true history. This means functioning without a vital asset that any people requires. The rescue and reconstruction of Kemetic history is but one small part of what should be a grand design for the rescue and reconstruction of the full picture. The culturally disarmed cannot stand as peers in a culturally armed world." And that's us. And that's the commitment Dr. Ben has had for 50 years. We've had many references to many people throughout African American history and African history and the search for ourselves. But I want to start by regurgitating some of those names and some of those instances. Because in the beginning of any history of Dr. Ben, one must begin with the achievements of us and Africans in the Nile Valley. Many students are heirs of the world's first recorded civilization in Kemet. The indigenous Africans of the Nile were the world's first writers, creating the Medu Neter. These noble Nile Valley Africans endured for nearly 3,000 years of unbroken, uninterrupted, recorded civilization. They developed religion and the beginnings of art and medicine. From inner Africa, Tarseti and Nubia, the world's first nation on earth, was 300 years older than Kemet. The first records of the human family comes from the rich earth of Africa. Science has belatedly conceded that the African woman of 200,000 years ago is the mother of mankind. And this is something that we really have to think about. Malcolm used to say that if you watch Newsweek or watch Time magazine, because if they put something concerning us on the cover, either it's something that's irrefutable truth, or it's a lie they're trying to pull over our eyes. And I think when they come out with that cover with the sister and brother, even though it was artistic drawing, the truth is coming from the rafters. This discovery, in one flash of time, has vindicated the work of Bernard Ingenio and the Hominid Gang and countless other Africans who ravaged the soil of Africa searching for their mirror image of 1,000,000 years or more ago. It was Africans that developed the classic expression of education in Kemet at Apet Asut. The search for the history of early man and Africans in the Nile Valley is an old subject among African people. You heard Hosea Easton. There were people such as James Morris Webb. There were people such as Raphael Powell, who wrote the book, The Human Side of a People and the Right Name. Of course, Edward Wilmot Blyton, as early as 1886, wrote of his visit to Egypt and his African ancestors of the Nile Valley. This is what he said: "This, thought I, was the work of my African progenitors. The feelings came over me far different from those I have ever felt when looking at the mighty works of European genius. I felt I had a peculiar heritage in the Great Pyramid built by my African ancestors, or by the enterprising sons of Ham from which I descended. The blood seemed to flow faster through my veins. I seemed to hear the echo of those illustrious Africans. I seemed to feel the impulse of those stirring characters who sent civilization to Greece. I felt lifted out of the commonplace grandeur of modern times, and could my voice have reached every African in the world, I would have earnestly addressed him, "Retake your fame," which was the address given by Dr. Carruthers in Kemet as part of the many addresses given to the thousands of African Americans and African diasporan people who went to Kemet this past summer. Even Frederick Douglass was captured by the legacy of Africans in the Nile Valley while visiting Kemet in 1886. Douglass not only visited the Sphinx, he was so inspired that he climbed to the top of one of the pyramids. There were countless other African Americans who were taken by the smell of Kemet. George Wells Parker, an African American medical student from Omaha, Nebraska, of course you know, wrote in 1918, The Children of the Sun, which documents the African origin of Egyptian civilization. African American women were not strangers to the field also. You've heard of Drusilla Dunjee Houston, who published The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire. And many of these books, and we talk about direction and what we need to do to follow in the path of Dr. Ben. I remember coming across Drusilla Dunjee Houston's book in 1972 at UFC, or University of Chicago's library. A brother and I Xeroxed the book. It shows that many of the works that some of our scholars don't pay attention to are locked up in some of these libraries, and it's our duty, if you're a student or if you can get in, to Xerox the book and spread the book. Asa always mentions about the use of the Xerox machine. It's like a guerrilla tactic. We have to spread this information. Of course, there's William Leo Hansberry and George G.M. James, who were staunch in their writings of the African foundations of Kemetic civilization. It was Hansberry who for over 50 years waged a holy war against academia, who refused to acknowledge the Africans or Africanness of Kemetic culture. James broke down the crumbling matchbox supports of Grecian civilization. He proved that the bedrock of Grecian culture came from the Africans of the Nile Valley. Nevertheless, the battleground over the heritage of Africans in the Nile Valley is still raging. It has been the frontal assault of Dr. Yosef ben Jochannan, which has inspired thousands of African Americans and African diasporan people to reclaim Kemet as their own. It is the meticulous research into the roots of African history that has endeared him to the scholar, the cab driver, and the everyday African of the street. Born in the Beta Israel community of Ethiopia in 1918, he spent his early years in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and South America. This is important. You know, a lot of times we get the history and the meat, but we need to find out what inspired this man to take on this task.
Really?
What blew his mind about Kemet before he even went there? As a youth, he was ridiculed, and this is the proverbial experience most of our people go through. He was ridiculed by a teacher who had said to him, paraphrasing, "You don't have a history." So what do? We start reading, we start searching. Dr. Ben was fortunate enough to have a father who was a student of African history. His father was a Garveyite in Cuba, as well as a Mason in the Ethiopian and Egyptian lodge. His father, as response to the incident, gave him a key to his library. There, Dr. Ben read of the history of his people in the Nile Valley and received information on the origins of man in Africa. His father instructed him to not only read every book in the library, but also to check the sources of the authors in the books. That's something we have to do too. Don't just read it and accept it hook, line, and sinker. Check out where he got his sources from. That's something Chancellor Williams also tells us. This will train a young Ben Jochannan in a research methodology that has carried on throughout his life. His books are masterpieces of information and documentation. He reminds me of what Sister Jeanette Cascon mentioned to me in New York, is that Dr. Hansberry at Howard for years kept all kind of photographs, illustrations, and so forth to document what he was teaching us about our heritage. And you just can't pick up Dr. Ben's books and not find your image, a map that brings home a crystal clear lesson. The hunger for knowledge of his people pushed young Ben to bolder exploits. We'll skip on because I got 10 minutes, I gotta go. After having traveled to the many parts of the African world, at the Caribbean and South America, he came to Harlem in 1945. He participated in many demonstrations during that time. On the streets of Harlem, he established himself as a truly dynamic speaker. Dr. Keffer, of course, mentioned how they went walking down, I think, 125th Street and bumped into Dr. Ben, talking about our heritage at a time when many of our people didn't want to hear it. Being active in the African community has been a lifelong priority for him. Many of you know of the invasion of the Congo and the assassination of Patrice Lumumba and the demonstration that Africans organized at the United Nations. Dr. Ben was there. He was instrumental in the State of the Race conferences, the African Heritage Studies Association, the Congress of African People in Atlanta. He's been an East African specialist in cultural anthropology at UNESCO. As an educator, he has taught at YMCAs, community centers, the street, major colleges and universities. Yet his greatest love is the education of African people concerning our legacy in Kemet and the Great Lakes region of the Nile Valley. Of course, you know of the countless generations of youth that he inspired at Malcolm King College and Harlem Prep. I want to read to you, and then I'm going to get to his main teachings, a statement that Chancellor Williams wrote in tribute to Professor Leo Hansberry. And this, to me, says what Dr. Ben means to us. He said, or wrote, when I got to Professor Hansberry, and every time I mention Hansberry, you think of Dr. Ben. When I got to Professor Hansberry at Howard, I found that he was teaching the history of the race almost in a hostile environment. Fact is, the whole race was hostile to the very idea of pursuing this. This puzzled me as a boy. I couldn't understand why the whole black community wasn't as upset about these questions as I was. Why did I happen to be the rebel? I couldn't understand that. Professor Hansberry was a welcome relief. So Professor Hansberry was my chief sources of inspiration. He represented my idea of a teacher, a real scholar who spent years and years in research, basic research, and yet he didn't have any of the airs. He wasn't proud, and that made him easily accessible to the students. He was the greatest single influence on me, and not only because of his scholarship, but because of his personal friendship, his friendly relations with the students, and you felt like you were sitting down with your brother. You didn't have to state he didn't have to state his deep personal interest. This came from the fact that he loved his race so much, that he loved the sons and daughters of his race, and he didn't have to say it. It just came through. And that comes through with Dr. Ben. So powerful and invigorating have Dr. Ben's teachings been that, of course, you know, many of us, 1,000 of us, went to Kemet this summer to reclaim our fame. But the pedagogy of Dr. Ben includes a 6-point historical analysis for African people. They are: 1, cultivate the African frame of reference, or race first, as Marcus Garvey taught. Constantly ask yourself, for whom and for what purpose does my work about Keebaland and her children serve? 3, learn other languages, African, Asian, or European. 4, obtain primary knowledge through oral history and primary sources, or return to the source. Conduct independent research. 5, build up a personal library of books and manuscripts primarily by African authorities. 6, use original terms people name themselves. And he had fundamental teachings, like Africa is the birthplace of mankind. Also, he taught, or part of his teachings are, Tamari is the world's oldest classical civilization. C, the Egyptian mystery system is the fountainhead of Western civilization. D, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are the products of African spiritual teachings. E, there's a cultural unity of African peoples worldwide, be they in the Pacific, Asia, Africa, or the Caribbean. F, the African woman is the mother of mankind and should be given the highest tribute possible. G, African people must boldly reclaim the old bones and artwork and treasures stolen from the Nile Valley and the African continent by cultural vampires. To steal a people's heritage is the worst form of genocide. H, African educators must be committed to teaching our story from our sources rather than his story. I'd like to also mention that Carter G. Woodson wrote in Miseducation of the Negro over 50 years or 55 years ago that the education of any people should begin with themselves. And I'd like to end by reading parts of a poem that was originally dedicated to Dr. John Henry Clark, written by Askia Muhammad Toure. Many of you know of the poet from Philadelphia, New York, Juju and Songhai and other poems or books. He wrote the poem Eye of the Master or the Eye of Heru for John Henry Clark and also for Dr. Ben. This is what he says of John Clark, and he later goes on to refer to Dr. Ben. Master, you are an old soul. You must have known the old empire with its pyramid age. You must have walked with Imhotep and married sages, for you embody a breed of man exceedingly rare among modern Africans, the selfless savant whose transcendental love and endless compassion embraces humanity and the vast cosmos. Diop walks with you, Huggins and the vulnerable Du Bois. Robeson's holy voice serenades you all as you stroll through the timeless galleries of our race, discussing messiahs, golden ages, transformations leading to the millennium. Referring to Dr. Ben, and I'll close on this. Only your colleague, Dr. Ben, Master Mason, will be left to instruct, admonish, and guide us. Brilliant and prickly, wondering why we dunderheads are so slow to pick up on the knowledge. Ben, who sternly rebukes a hazy response to any obvious inquiry with, God, you young folks must dig, 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 research, research, and lose much, much sleep. And one last point is I challenge the students in the Africana Studies program at Cornell and the directors to compile an audio library, if possible, of Dr. Ben's lectures here in his 15 years at Cornell. I asked that the people at First World and in New York, his home base, to compile tapes of his lectures at First World, to oversee his legacy, his library. It's important. Hansberry left us. It's hard to even get a tape recording of his voice today. I wouldn't want to see the day when we don't have that record of Dr. Ben. Just imagine if we didn't have a record of Dr. Ben's legacy. I pay tribute to Dr. Ben.
Well, thanks very much, Brother Larry. Thank you for those words and insight, and mostly thank you for your suggestions and your challenge. I hope that those of you out there, those of us, have heard him well, and will take him up. After our next speaker, we will indicate exactly what the very next steps will be in terms of preparation for this evening. As you know, we have one more presentation, our last speaker, Brother Leonard Jeffries. And because of his tremendous endearing respect for the clock, we have held him for last. Thank you. Hotep, brothers and sisters. Wake up.
This is going to be real, James.
I think I've had this conviction for some time, and I think most of you will agree with me that after Brother Turner's last remarks, he's been at Cornell too long. We need to bring him down home, back to 125th Street, 135th Street. There's something they call African time. That means doing the thing at the right time. But of course, you have to know when your time. Luckily, we have the First World Alliance that Sister Kefa, Brother Bill, and Doc Ben have hooked up. That gives us a chance to really express ourselves in a context in which we're not worried about when we have to be out. As a result of that Africanizing experience and very humanizing experience, Dr. Clark and myself usually warm up in the first 30 or 40 minutes before we get down to serious business. Given my constraints, there's doubt that there's no need to get warmed up because they closed the door on us. But this has been a fantastic experience of the family. And so there's not much for me to say except to try to pull some things together. First, to thank the Almighty, because most of you don't know about this space and place here called Ithaca on this hill called Cornell. But they only allot at most 10 to 12 days a year for sunshine here. And we have to be thankful that we got 2 of them out of that 10. The African gods were really looking down on us. Also, we really have to be thankful that the brothers here around James and his family, and he's passed the torch on to Brother Harris, have really pulled together something beautiful, warm, where we can be ourselves. And I have never been here for any activity that has not been like this. You know, we came, it was a year or so ago for James. And it was a fantastic experience. A year or so before that, we came for Dr. Clark, a dedication of the library. And it was one of these African family experiences. So it's quite clear that in this monster institution called Cornell, there has been a special African space and place created around James Turner and his extended African family. And let's give the brother an acknowledgement of that. But of course, today our major focus is Dr. Yosef ben Jochannan. And I am a little tired, not because of the activity of the day, but because we're at the end of they've given us a holiday, Martin Luther King's birthday, and that stretches out a couple of weeks in January. Then we jump into that short month, but this year was a long month, February. And you got your Black History where you're running here and you're running there. Then we moved into March, and we had ASCAC in Baltimore. And that took an enormous psychic power, but we got it together, and we had it, and we continued. And then we moved from ASCAC into the National Council for Black Studies. And this time it was in Philadelphia, where a brother called Dr. Malefi Asante and his sister at Penn have been trying to work on an African spirit for NCBS. And for the first time in the history of NCBS, they really had it. It was really captured in Philadelphia. For the first time, people looked African, they acted African, they felt African. Malefi had his beautiful white African robe on with the gold embroidery, and the sister had a beautiful white African with the gold embroidery and a gold kente cloth, and they expressed themselves African. So NCBS was a fantastic experience. I had a beautiful experience in the Philadelphia community when I ran to speak to some folks, and they kept me there for 4 hours. Then we went to Washington. AHSA, that's a special part of the family. And this was a tribute to Dr. Clark, 20 years. And it was a together thing. It was the family again. Who was there? Dr. Asa Hilliard had come in. But see, now we don't even travel alone anymore. You see, if you are together and correct, you got somebody with you. If it ain't your wife, well, let's not talk about your girlfriend. If it ain't your wife, then
it's your children, or it's your students, or it's your colleagues. You go with somebody to share the experience. And that's why I'm so glad that it's such a family affair here, that we do have all of us considered a part of Dr. Ben's extended family, and you have his blood family with him. That's what it's all about. And of course, we're in the Turner family bailiwick. So it is about this family prospect. In AHSA, we're moving to another level, we hope, a very African level. And it's about time. Because it looks like for the first time in our history, even though the black woman has always been there in front of us, around us, between our legs, holding us up, for the first time we may have, and I hope we do have, an African woman at the head of the African Heritage Studies Association. Charsee McIntyre is running for the president of the organization. And then, of course, that wasn't it. That's why I'm tired. Rosalind and I, along with the Turners, are planning to escape down to Brazil to relax. For study. It's a purpose of study. But I know we're going to be traumatized. Dr. Ben knows if there is a disaster among African peoples, my instinct tells me it's Brazil. If we've got problems here at Cornell and in New York and Philadelphia and in the Caribbean and on the African continent, they're magnified in terms of what people have done to the Brazilian psyche, heart, and spirit. The most African people in the Western Hemisphere, but without an African, true African consciousness, caught up in a Brazilian mulattoization, where that white pussy syndrome is at the core and heart of everything. I can say it here, and I have said it. A Pele, the greatest athletic figure, if that boy, the Jimmy the Greek, was talking about anybody, with super thighs going up into his super back, holding up on the super shoulders and the super brain, it was the King Pele, the greatest soccer player that ever lived. But Pele was not great in Brazilian eyes until he married right, and that meant marrying white. And that's what he did. When we go to Brazil, James, we just can't relax. We will relax, but there's another look at what has happened to us in terms of the destruction of the black mind, and the responsibility we have of taking it back. Because the most vibrant thing of Brazil, which makes Brazil great, is its Africanness. And they've got to understand that in its fullest dimension. And it's not just Contemplé or Mongombo, it's going back into African greatness that goes throughout the continent and that resided heavily and intensely in the Nile Valley, which is what Dr. Ben had been telling us about. So these last few weeks and months have been an exhilarating experience. I need the strength because we're about to do heavy battle at City College. If the Jews wanted this time to call out their forces, we are ready to call out ours. You'll be hearing more about it. But you needed this forcefulness, this energizing thing to take place. We had the Melanin Conference. People like Dr. King and others flew in from San Francisco with Dr. Wade Nobles, etc., and brothers and sisters came. And do you know, Dr. Ben sat quietly. You know he's getting old. Dr. Ben sat quiet for several days, listened, learned, inspired us. Right down front. The last day they had the final session with the panel, got up on the stage, and they were supposed to be ending this thing. And so I asked Wade Noble, I said, Wade, are we supposed to be up here? And he said, well, you know, we want the few people focusing on a melon. I said, good, so I sat in the back. I said, well, what about my wife? He said, well, maybe she can come on up. I said, what about Dr. Ben? He said, well, Dr. Ben is going to be all right. He's sitting right down front. I said, wait, that ain't going to work. You know, Dr. Ben sitting down front, he ain't going to be happy just sitting down front. Sure enough, as fate would have it, Rosalind got a little spiritual inkling and said that we should be doing more than just meeting. We should be doing something. And then the brother Malachi got up and he said he felt that something should happen too, and that he was not happy that we are here and we haven't put something together. We haven't structured something to do something for our people. And then the spirit started to spread to those brothers. I saw them getting nervous and antsy up there. And then somebody said, well, if you need some help, we'll help you. That's from the audience. You know, black folks caught up into this thing. And so then what happened? Malachi jumped up and said, okay. And they said, we'll raise some money there. And on the spot, all this African energy was moving through the audience. And Brother Malachi jumped up and said, where's a hat? And he got a hat to go up on the stage and then to leap down in the audience. But lo and behold, the first person he leaped in front of with the hat was Dr. Yosef Ben Jochannan. Dr. Ben stopped him in his tracks and said, whoa, bro, that ain't the way it go. Let me show you how to do it. So Malachi jumped back up on the stage. He said, can't do it. I was told by the master that this ain't the way it's done. Lo and behold, who hopped up on the stage? Dr. Yosef Ben Jochannan took over the show. Got that African energy together, focused it. And before we could turn around, Dr. Ben was there. This is the way we do it in our African community. Those people who have some resources, the $50, come on down front. I said, wait a minute, Doc. 50, what about the hundreds? I got $100, but he said, bring those up too. So a few of us brought up some hundreds. Then the 50s came up, then the 20s. Before we knew it, in a matter of minutes, $5,000 was raised right there on the spot. As quiet as it was kept, it was 4,700 and something. But an African sister, and the African woman has the resources, we know that. One African sister here, sitting here, grabbed me by the arm and said, Dr. J, let them know that it's not $4,768. It's $5,000. However short of 5,000 we find ourselves to be, I will make up the difference. I don't want no credit. I don't want nobody to know who I am, but I will make up the difference. Now that's the African woman. She's always been there at the time of need, always with that extra support, always putting us over the top. And as quiet as it's kept, that's what the brother has been trying to tell us all these years. That at the heart of it all is the African woman. We've been looking other ways, looking toward that white thing here and looking toward that white thing there. But Dr. Ben said, wait a minute. You're blinded. Focus right down front where it's supposed to be on that African woman. Because the center of everything is the African woman. And if there is one message that's central to what the brother has been trying to say, is that we are a family, and a family focuses on the center. And the center for Africans is the woman. And you got to understand that. If you can't build with the woman, the African woman, then you can't build. We were nervous because we didn't understand. How come he beating up on poor these brothers? How come he, we want to relate to Dr. Diop, this is one of the greatest minds to walk the planet. Why can't we embrace him and all that he is all about? Dr. Ben said, wait a minute. I don't care how brilliant he is, how great he is. There's a problem. I said, Doc, we know about the problem. It's been there for 30 years. I don't care. It's still there. Ain't no justification for it. The Senegalese women are the greatest African women on the planet. They stand atop anybody in terms of dignity, intelligence. There ain't no excuse for it. And he made us question. We related to Dr. Diop as a brother, an elder, but we knew there was a question mark that was very real for us. And the only person who had the strength to do it was Dr. Yosef Ben Jochannan. And I have to tell you, I know what he meant. It became real to me when we went to Senegal, Dr. Clark and I, and we went to the home. Dr. Diop had died, but a medal had been prepared for him to give to him, plus a plaque. And so we felt we should continue the process which we had started, which was to take it to him. We met his son. Dr. Diop had 4 sons, brilliant young men with his great African genes. And they're nuclear physicists. The youngest one's a medical doctor, etc., carrying on his tradition. But when we went to the home, there she was. And when we went to give the medal, and we thought the eldest son would take it, and there she took it. Didn't give it to him. She put it on herself. Oh, God. She did. I'll never forget it. But it pointed up to me this enormous contradiction we have when we do not put the African woman at the center. We compromise that genius that is African. Diop's children, no matter how great they are, will always be conflicted because they will have that European mother in the middle of their psychic center. And if you do not have an African mother at the center of your psychic being, you can't be real, you can't be whole. So we need to understand that, and thank you, brother, for those such things. I've been plagued by little people. ever since I was born. Don't laugh, Sister Kefa. You coming up. I tell you I wanted to do a roast, and we got my roast. I got a few minutes. My roast is coming up. Little people have been plaguing me. First little person that plagued me, sitting right back there, Mrs. Leola Jeffries. 3 little women plagued my life. One is Leola Jeffries, my mama. And she's the one that pushed me toward Africa. She's the one that pushed me toward our history. She's the one that gave me these books first. She was the first teacher. And then when it quiet as it's kept, her father, my grandfather, was a Garveyite, so she had a foundation. And then as I grew, there was another little woman that grabbed me after I came back from Africa. This one was from Harlem, my little Harlem flower, Rosalind Jeffries. And of course, she kept me honest in terms of Africa too, because that was where her heart was. So we've been able to go as a pair and deal with this enormity of our culture and our history. And so and in doing so, we've been relating to these elders in a family way, to Dr. Clark's, to Dr. Ben's, in ways that you don't know how great it is for us to have this type of relationship. There may be disagreements. Rosalind disagrees with me on it, but there's a love no matter what. And she'll defend Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben no matter what. And I have to appreciate my lady because she'll defend me. She knows I'm out there doing all these different things for the people. And she knows that that's my mission. And she's got to help me and she's got to support me. That's what keeps Dr. Ben. Gertrude knows. He may not be bringing the bacon home, so Gertrude goes and gets some bacon herself so that everybody can have something. Because he's doing the work of the race. And if you're doing the work of the race, there's other people that got to do some other things. That's what it's all about. And then lo and behold, in the middle of my life 10 years ago comes another little old lady. And then she comes with a big man, too, to protect her. Sister Kefa Jones. And of course, she got Dr. Ben. And see, it's important for you to understand the relationships that I'm trying to raise because you need people to keep you honest in this society which is designed to suck you off into an abyss. And if you do not have those people who can look you in, my mother can bring me down with a word, which she did a few years ago, with a word, you see? Sister Kefa can do it with a look, a body language. She has everybody psyched out. It's the accountability in the African family, which is needed. Rosa knows that she can do it whenever she needs to and wants to. And it's necessary at home because she cut off the flow of whatever is necessary to survive. We have to understand that. At the center of our life is this African strength. But key to my intellectual development, key to my political awakeness has been 3 little men. I tell you, I've been plagued by these little people. Out of Harlem came a little man about this high, black as he can be, Dr. James H. Robinson. And he had a thing about Africa. Of course, he was caught up in the integration era, but he said we got to relate to Africa. When I heard him speaking at Lafayette College, I was in tears. I'm sitting in an auditorium with 1,500 white people, and this man is saying the challenge is Africa. You got to relate to Africa. It was as if he was talking to nobody but me. I said, yes, it is. And I have been to Africa 40 or 50 times ever since the man said, let's go. Changed my life. Put me in Africa. Yeah. Then a few years ago, 10 years down the road, here comes another little man from Harlem, 137th Street, Dr. John Henry Clark. And he said, it's not just the African experience physically that you need, it's the African experience intellectually that will transform you and make you into a stronger individual. And he began my first serious doctoral studies. Now, I had my doctorate from Columbia University, but I'm talking about serious doctoral studies. Began with Dr. John Henry Clark, sitting at his feet. When you walk into his house, you know you're going into a library. His house, you're greeted at the door with books. He has one room upstairs he called the Jewish room, 600 books on Jews. That's doctoral studies, knowing that in that house there's something special going on. I felt more comfortable there with those 8,000 to 10,000 books than the 1,000,000 books in the Butler Library at Columbia University, because I knew I was there, and it was being transmitted by people like Dr. Henry Clark and Dr. Ben. Then 10 years later, out of Harlem comes another little man, 135th Street, Dr. Yosef Ben Jochannan. And he said, it ain't just about Africa, not intellectually, but you got to make it spiritually. It ain't just about studying it, it's got to be alive in you. It's got to give you strength. It's got to transform you. You know, people are talking about transformation and resurrection and all this. Dr. Ben said it got to be real. And he's there watching every step of the way to make sure that the James Smalls, the Len Jeffries, the Malefi Asantes, and the rest of us are real. We don't appreciate it when he beats up on us. The lashes on my back, I've had Rosin work on these lashes for so many years. But they are necessary. Who else is going to do it with the respect and love that I know it's coming from? Other people aren't trying to raise me up. They're trying to keep me down. And that's what Dr. Benson's mission has been. And what he has done beautifully is to deal with concepts about this enormous body of knowledge. That's why wherever I go, and this little white boy who wrote these little nasty articles about me said, Dr. J lugs in these books into class. And it got these students dragging in all these books and all this. You better believe it. I don't go nowhere without lugging my books. Because that's what it's all about. When I talked about Dr. Ben's books, I was very real the other day. And I have them. I have them. These are the jewels of the family. I pulled these out of the safes and the files locked up. Black man of the Nile and his family. I was sorry that I grabbed the wrong Black man of the Nile. I got one that goes back before this one. This is the 3rd edition in 73. There's one that's 70, I think, Dr. Ben. I got that at home, locked up somewhere so it don't get lost. And then, of course, John Clark and others will be talking about books such as this, Africa, the mother of Western civilization. Now, you see what I'm talking about in terms of thickness of these books? Now, you say these books are made for the ordinary John in the street? They're made for all of us, the John in the street, the scholars. Do you think I got any of this at Columbia University or the University of Lausanne in Switzerland? They wouldn't give us this knowledge. And of course, I just was able to obtain, I have a copy of this at home. My brother Small said he was going to give me a copy, African Origins of the Major Western Religions. But don't stop there. Dr. Yosef Ben Jochannan even produces some small ones. The mystery systems. This is another example. Nope. And then Charsee just passed me this one. It's on sale here today. Black Seminarians, our black clergy. And of course, one that I had to pull down from the shelf, We the Black Jews. The man has put his heart into this. And what is it about? Not footnoting, which some of our scholars have said it is about. No, it isn't about footnoting. It's about concepts. And these concepts he's made very real for us. He's certainly made them very real for me. I have used his concepts and created what I call pyramid consciousness to help our young people organize this enormous body of material. It's the best teaching tool I ever had. It is so effective that when you go before white folks and the corporate structure and explain the concept, they say, wow, we're ignorant. We don't know. How can we compute and think if we don't have this African foundation? And that's what Dr. Ben was talking about. And I'll give you 3 images and then try to sit down. And those 3 images involve the pyramid, which Dr. Ben said is not a group of bricks put together in a formation, but it's a spiritual concept. There's much more to this than meets the eye, and the European is not capable of grasping it. His materialistic view of the world does not allow him to grasp the spiritual significance of something so monumental as this. And then within the whole context of the various pyramids in this concentration, the Africans were trying to say something. The Sphinx speaks to us about the ability to transform from the low level of the beast through the human level to the divine level. Dr. Ben was trying to say you can be godly and God. That's a concept. The Banaka built into the culture of our peoples. Now Reverend Ike and other people are taking it to make money on. But it's a concept Dr. Ben said is part of our transformation. And then of course, Charsee mentioned he has this concept of the Sphinx, of the obelisk. This is your concept, African women. We take our children down and show them the George Washington Monument. We don't have the knowledge to say that's the African concept of the regenerative power of the female to restore and resurrect that the Europeans have stolen and used to energize themselves. And then most of us have these degrees out of these so-called great European institutions, but Dr. Ben has said none of them compared to this one thousands of years ago. The greatest living monument to the genius of the African, the complex around the lodge at Waset. And the pyramid, the temple complex at Karnak was attached to it by a row of sphinx. Can you imagine the magnificence of the umbilical cord linking the great Karnak temple, the greatest temple in the history of the world, with this great intellectual and spiritual center? No other people have created anything like that. That's why in Homer, in the Iliad or the Odyssey, could say that the greatest city of the world was not Athens, not Sparta, not Corinth, but Thebes, the Greeks called it the city of 100 gates. And Dr. Ben has let us know that it's not a pile of ruins. These concepts are alive. They're that which gives him his energy. You can organize around those concepts. You can organize a mystery system, tapping into those concepts. You can organize family systems, tapping into those concepts. You need to reform everything you're doing, your churches, your Masonic orders, your fraternal groups on these colleges, your sorority groups on these concepts. You need to Africanize. The secrets were here for your resurrection. That's what Dr. Ben has been yelling and screaming and telling us. And in doing so, as we get into what Dr. Ben has outlined for us, we are in trouble because we're conflicting with the whole inherited history of the European. We're conflicting with this concept of the origin of humankind, Adam and Eve myth. We know that there is a scientific origin of humankind, a religious origin of humankind, and it's an African origin of humankind. We know that there's an evolution of society, and it didn't take place in the ice of Europe in the caves. That evolution of society that is meaningful evolved in Africa. So Africa is the center of the evolution of the society of the human. And then Africa is the cradle of high culture and civilization. Not just Egypt, where the pinnacle was reached at a certain point, but going down into Nubia, down into the Great Lakes region. Dr. Ben has let us know that, and John Clark is always there to say, and it spread throughout the continent. Our brothers complementing each other. But when we get into this culture, and we learn about the African diffusion of culture and civilization, we learn that there was a diffusion to the ancient Hebrews, so-called. There was a diffusion to the Greeks. There was a diffusion to others, the Persians, but nobody wants to give credit to the African. There was a diffusion all the way into Asia, into India, and up into Japan. No one wants to give credit to the Africans. Dr. Ben says the African is due his credit. There is what we call the stolen legacy of the Greeks. There is what we call the African Judeo-Christian heritage and Islamic heritage. And there is an African factor in the world which we have to use to build upon. In building, there are what I call 7 passages we have to go through. Those 7 passages are: we need an African socialization. We need to inculcate the value systems of Africa for our people. We need an African acculturation. We need to begin to think of group and collective behavior as we do the things that we need to do. We need an African spiritualization, learning about the moral and ethical values that our people left as a legacy for a world. We need an African collectivization, doing things together for a meaningful purpose. And that African collectivization will lead us to an African communalization. Not moving out of our communities like the European tells us to do in order to be achievers, but staying with our communities, building them together. And then that will lead to an African politicalization, doing things in our own interests, exercising our power, and that will lead to an African perpetuation, perpetuating ourselves through time and history, in space and place, to transform this universe. We have to give Dr. Ben credit for all of these things that we are now seriously doing, because he has been a single beacon calling for us to look at the Nile and nourishing ourselves by it. We now have to say, having been nourished, and the brother having come this far with his partners, Dr. Clark, what are we going to do in the real concrete terms, like Gil Noble talked about, to make sure that his work, his life's work, his achievements, his books, his library is part of a continuous process of regeneration of the African spirit and is not lost in any confusion. We have to come together after this and pull together a team of people who are going to plan how we can tap into the resources. So Dr. Ben will never be scowling around, prowling around, trying to make something when he don't need to make it. It should just be coming in, because we Africans know what it's all about. Pulling our resources together to raise up a group of Africans to take the world. Thank you very much.
Right on time. Thanks, Brother Len. At this point, of course, we conclude this afternoon's program with the conclusion of this session. The formal part of the day's program ends until this evening. As you can tell from the program, we will be reconvening in about 2 hours from now for the banquet.